The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The last 24 hours have been just an embarrassing display of ignorance, lack of tact and diplomacy, just flat out erratic and dangerous behavior from President Donald Trump on his Twitter account. I actually have 3 different stories that I could have started with that exact same introduction, but I want to actually start with North Korea. North Korean dictator Kim Jong-Un recently gave a speech where he said that the U.S. must remember that he has buttons on his desk for launching nuclear weapons against the United States. Not surprising, right? This is the type of bluster that we're used to from Kim Jong-un. And normally Western leaders don't stoop to the level of North Korean leadership. And this includes U.S. presidents. Again, historically speaking, we are the adults in the room. We have no reason diplomatically or behaviorally or interpersonally to match this just silly childish rhetoric. But that doesn't apply to Donald Trump, who took to Twitter after Kim Jong-un said this and threatened nuclear war against North Korea, saying North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just stated that the nuclear button is on his desk at all times. Will someone from his depleted and food-starved regime please inform him that I too have a nuclear button, but it is a much bigger and more powerful one than his, and my button works. This might be the most outrageous tweet from the president so far, and he has sent no shortage of despicable and concerning tweets in his first year in office. There are countless ways that we could analyze this, and it's sort of difficult to know where to start. And there are some Trumpists who are defending what Trump said as, hey, this is good. He's showing Kim Jong-un that he also has nukes, and he can use them, and he's willing to use them, and he's not going to get pushed around. Kim Jong-un knows what the United States has, and the U.S. has used nuclear weapons before. So that's not going to come as a surprise to Kim Jong-un, but this legitimizes Kim Jong-un and the North Korean regime. Normally, Kim Jong-un issues these decrees, and publicly, world leaders denounce them, and then they diplomatically, behind closed doors, scientists and engineers, they go to work and assess, well, is it true? Does he really have the capability to just launch nuclear weapons on short notice and hit the United States or what? But you don't publicly match the guy's rhetoric because you are stooping to his level. Here, Donald Trump is matching Kim Jong-un's rhetoric exactly. He's even using the same language about buttons on the desk that Kim Jong-un used. Do you realize how this validates Kim Jong-un? What Trump is telling him by sending this tweet is not only can you get me to threaten you by giving a speech where you mention nuclear weapons, you are also going to get me to use your language. This is a way in which Trump is, I know we talk about Trump being manipulated. This is exactly what Kim Jong-un wants. This will make Kim Jong-un do even more of this because he likes the attention from Donald Trump. I've said it before, Pat. This is the political equivalent of a penis size contest. And this is actually reinforced by this exchange. George Carlin actually said it best. Check this out.
Me? I look at war a little bit differently. To me, war is a lot of prick waving, okay? Simple thing, that's all it is. War is a whole lot of men standing out in the field waving their pricks at one another. Men are insecure about the size of their dicks, and so they have to kill one another over the idea.
This is basically a penis-sized statement from Trump, right? When he says my button is bigger than Kim Jong-un's, that's what he's doing, and the world is laughing at the guy.
Yeah, maybe that plays into why he always brags about his hand size, too, I guess.
Indeed.
It's interesting to contrast it to what Obama's treatment of North Korea was as well.
Absolutely.
Because it was largely just to ignore them, but I think Trump would look at that as meek or tepid in some way. I mean, that doesn't fit his style so much.
It doesn't, but the problem is that even though this is Trump's style, we're almost operating in a world where we pretend this has no consequences, right? And when people start to die as a result of this, things are going to change very quickly. Last thing on the timing of Trump's tweet, once again, it seems like Fox News is to blame. Kim Jong-un actually gave this speech a few days ago Why did Trump just tweet about it yesterday? Well, Matthew Gertz from Media Matters pointed out on Twitter that Fox News covered this at 7:37 p.m. yesterday, and Trump tweeted about it 12 minutes later at 7:49 p.m. So once again, this is the sort of sad and shameful state of American politics right now, where Fox News is directly influencing the public international decrees of the President of the United States. When does the line get crossed, right? Like, does threatening nuclear warfare on Twitter cross the line? Or is that more of the straight talk that the Trumpists say they like?
And it's hard to measure which Trump addiction is worse, his one to Twitter or his one to
Fox
and
News.
Friends.
Yeah, although he denies now that he's watching as much TV as all of the articles say. I believe it. I mean, the timing of every single one of these is just, there's no other reasonable explanation. Donald Trump has now gone over the line into full-blown conspiracy theories. You might say, hold on a second, David, hasn't he always been a conspiracy theorist? I mean, Obama born in another country, the birther stuff. Hillary cheated on the popular vote with 3 to 5 million illegal voters. The Mueller investigation is a Democratic setup, whatever. That's true, but now Trump is actually jumping onto a bigger and more established conspiracy theory, that of the deep state. What is the deep state? So generally, deep state means it's the idea of a group of powerful people, typically everybody ranging from government, sometimes very wealthy, plutocrats, military, who are working together to secretly manipulate government and world policy, maybe for their benefit. This is at the level of like the Illuminati or the Bilderberg Group conspiracies, whatever. Donald Trump is fully in on this now. Trump claimed in a tweet, of course, where else is he going to do it, that the United States Justice Department is part of the deep state, tweeting, crooked Hillary Clinton's top aide, Huma Abedin, has been accused of disregarding basic security protocols. She put classified passwords, why classified passwords is capitalized, we will never know, into the hands of foreign agents. Remember sailors' pictures on submarine? Jail. Deep State Justice Department must finally act, also on Comey and others. It's important not to understate or misunderstand what it is that Donald Trump is suggesting here. The President of the United States is saying that the American Justice Department, as a result of being controlled and manipulated by this shadowy group of co-conspirators, is going after him, but not Huma Abedin and crooked Hillary, and that the former FBI Director James Comey is involved in this. If your crazy uncle at Thanksgiving who works in accounting comes up with this, you don't really worry too much. If Cletus, who changes your oil, tells you this, you say, okay, they're misinformed, but it really doesn't have a major impact. This is the President of the United States, who believes that there is a conspiracy by which the Justice Department has been co-opted by a secret group of powerful people working together for, I guess, their gain, rather than fulfilling their role as the top law enforcement agency of the United States. Our own president appears to believe that there is a shadow government and that it is conspiring against him personally.
Yeah, and it really doesn't make sense that he could still be a conspiracy theorist, too, because, you know, I can understand maybe back during the election when he was calling the system rigged and that everything was against him. You can kind of rationalize how he would come to that position.
Outsider.
But now that he's in charge and he can pick the people who are in the Justice Department, in the FBI, which he calls corrupt, it doesn't hold up anymore.
Well, that's why it's even crazier, because the interesting thing to me about this is that those who believe in the deep state usually believe that the president is an irrelevant puppet with no real power or say-so, right? The deep state really has the power. The president has no power. I know I'm going further here than Trump ever could in his thinking, which is so simplistic. But by Trump's tacit admission that the deep state exists and is in control of the Justice Department, Trump is effectively saying he is an irrelevant puppet. In other words, if the deep state exists, Trump has no power. And Trump is saying that the deep state exists. He's parroting conspiracy theories, often right-wing ones, but he's kind of framing them as nationalistic in some way to go with this faux populist rhetoric that he's been using now for over a couple years. And the problem is that the deep state, right, it involves the military and the Pentagon and these areas of government that it's normally the American right that really likes. These are not lefty agencies that Trump is picking a fight with and discrediting. It's the ones that the right typically defends. How is that going to work out for him? Because he's basically putting himself at direct odds with the military, Pentagon, and FBI, which are not organizations that the right usually picks fights with.
He's taken a few different positions simultaneously.
Yes.
We've seen it before, and he can justify anything with it.
Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pacman Show. We've got a great program for you today and a couple very interesting announcements coming up after the break.
The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com. The David Pacman Show at davidpacman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Nora Robinson. Nora, thank you so much for being a David Pacman Show member, and thanks to everybody who has signed up for membership or made a Patreon pledge in this very, very early period of 2018. We're off to a great start. You can, of course, sign up for membership. Join Nora at davidpacman.com/membership. You can also make a pledge on Patreon of as little as just $1 per month at patreon.com/David Pacman Show. All right, it's a big day today because it is time for the first Hatriot Mail of 2018. Here's a quick reminder about what Hatriot Mail is.
Because we cling to our guns and our God, but somehow totally cool with a billionaire who wants to assault our wife. Hatriot Mail.
Right.
Written by patriots who hate David Pacman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, so as a quick explainer, because we're resetting Hatriot Mail in 2018.
Beginning of the year, absolutely.
Beginning of the year. Hatriot Mail is we take the crazy hate mail that we receive, and then a professional voiceover artist narrates it and does a dramatic reading of it. And we are starting the year off very, very strong. Take a listen to this week's Hatriot Mail.
People just don't like you, Davey. Lisping homosexual, communist, puke immigrant, Jew boy, pile of feces. Get back to community college with your little boyfriends and do your stupid little America-hating propaganda show there. Maybe at community college you can get some help with your gay little lisp. Kirk.
Why is immigrant in quotes? We put up a transcript of this for people, and every single insult was there in the literal sense, but immigrant was in quotes. I really was born in Argentina and came to the United States as a kid. I don't know why you would put that in quotes.
It's almost like Donald Trump dictated this.
Yeah, it actually does.
Use of quotes and capital letters even.
The only thing that's missing is the capital letters and weird parenthetical phrases and whatnot. This is a very, very strong Hatriot Mail to start the year on, I feel.
Yeah,
like.
I mean, I made a New Year's resolution that I'm not going to let Hatriot Mail get to me. I'm not going to lose sleep over it.
Right.
And I hope you do the same.
I've been doing it for years, absolutely. And I'm going to continue that in 2018. You can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive. We have a membership coupon code, which is Hatriot40. That's HATRIOT40. And if you go to davidpacman.com/membership, pick any membership you like, and put in the coupon code Hatriot40 when you're checking out, you will save 40% off of your membership. It is the way to sort of give a middle finger to the Hatriots when you use that coupon code. Okay, let me update you on a big, big thing that we are doing. I've talked before about this critical thinking mini-series that we are going to be putting out. And what this is going to be is a somewhere in the range of 12 to 15 part mini-series, which will address the various elements of critical thinking. And this is related to the course syllabus for the class that I taught last semester at Boston College, although it's separate from taking my long-form lectures and making those available. That's a later project. The critical thinking mini-series will include such topics as identifying good and bad arguments, understanding logical fallacies, and many, many other great topics. Initially, we decided to tie the production and release of this mini-series to a Patreon donation goal, and we picked 2,250 as the number. And the reason that we selected that number is because this is a lot of work. 12 to 15 really highly produced videos that will make up this mini-series. It's a lot of work. We were targeting 2,250 patrons for that. Now you might say, well, hold on, Patreon patrons, what's that? Patreon is a system that you can look at our page for at patreon.com/David Pacman Show, which allows people to pledge any amount of money that they want to the program. We launched our Patreon page in 2017, sort of as a direct reaction to YouTube's demonetization adpocalypse. And we were well on our way to 2,250 patrons. And you'll see that right now, We're only at 1,935. What exactly happened? Well, two things happened. Number one, Patreon announced that they were changing their fee structure and pushing more of the fee that they take onto the donor, onto you. Ultimately, they backed off of that change because it was received so disastrously and they lost a ton of money and creators lost a ton of money. They've taken that back, but fewer people ever see the correction, right? And a lot of people don't realize that Patreon has changed their mind about that. And then January 1st happened. And on the 1st of every month, a lot of people's credit and debit cards have expired. And so many of the pledges, usually about 5%, will fail. So we got knocked down all the way to 1,935, which puts 2,250 patrons pretty far away. But I have really good news for you on this. We have found two sponsors for the mini-series, and we found sponsors. I'm not going to tell you who they are yet, but these are sponsors whose missions align directly with the teaching of critical thinking skills. And because we are subsidizing the production of the critical thinking mini-series with these two sponsorships, we can reduce the target patrons from 2,250 to 2,100. And you'll see that updated now at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. When we reach 2,100 patrons, we will record, edit, and upload the multi-part critical thinking miniseries, first to patrons and eventually for full distribution. We can do this, can't we, Pat? Because we were above 2,100 patrons late in 2017. Then the fee thing happened, and then January 1st happened. But 2,100, I feel like, is very, very reasonable.
Yeah, we're 165 away. We can do that, especially with this rallying cry.
I believe so. Oh, believe me, I'll be crying later, but that's going to be off camera. But thanks for bringing that up. We even have, and I want to share this with you, we've got an introduction that was made by producer Noah Ferguson. It's ready to go, which we're showing our television audience. I actually believe that this might be the best sort of long form, I guess I'd call it like an extra segment type of thing that we will have ever produced when it's done. It's going to be really, really good.
It's going to be an hour plus content, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So help us get there. Okay. 2,100 is very doable. Whether you contribute $1 or $5 or 10 or 100, it's a patron goal of 2,100 patrons. So any contribution gets us closer. More on this, hopefully very, very soon. Okay, as you might recall, Donald Trump had big promises about solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the big promise was he's going to solve it, which is a very, very big promise to make, particularly from someone like Trump, who understands nothing about the conflict, as we found out. Now, this obviously represented a total lack of understanding by Trump and even the people around him of the conflict. But his actions were also always counterproductive in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You'll remember Donald Trump selected David Friedman to be the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Guy's outrageous, right? Wants more settlements in Israel. Totally abortive choice in terms of furthering the peace process. Then Trump said that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, was going to be in charge of the negotiations. He has no experience nor qualifications whatsoever to be involved in those negotiations. And then more recently, late in 2017, Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Jerusalem is a disputed territory. It is part of the conflict. And the United States doing that goes completely counter to framing ourselves as possible unbiased arbiters of peace discussions in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So that's all the lead up to yesterday. And yesterday, Donald Trump takes to Twitter, and he threatens to cut off aid to Palestinians after they completely understandably say, hey, listen, the U.S. is recognizing Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. Clearly, they are not an unbiased arbiter here. We no longer accept, or we will not accept, the United States as a negotiator here. It makes total sense. It was completely predictable after Donald Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital. And then Trump takes to Twitter in response to this statement from the Palestinians and says it's not only Pakistan that we pay billions of dollars to for nothing, but also many other countries and others. As an example, we pay the Palestinians hundreds of millions of dollars a year and get no appreciation or respect. They don't even want to negotiate a long overdue peace treaty with Israel. We have taken Jerusalem, the toughest part of the negotiation, off the table, but Israel for that would have had to pay more. But with the Palestinians no longer willing to talk peace, why should we make any of these massive future payments to them? Let's break this down into its component parts and take it step by step, as I like to. It's completely legitimate to question foreign aid payments to other countries and to other peoples, period. Of course, that is valid. Donald Trump is right that it has been very difficult to get Palestinian representatives to the table to negotiate peace in good faith. There's no doubt about that. And by the way, the truth is that the current Israeli government also doesn't really want to negotiate peace in good faith. Benjamin Netanyahu benefits from the status quo. That's another story, which I've talked about many times before. But for Donald Trump to publicly and embarrassingly threaten to pull funding via Twitter is self-sabotage, or as William Shatner says, sabotage, for the peace negotiations that Trump said he wanted to succeed with. That's the sick reality of this. Trump is sabotaging his own agenda, right? He ran on solving the conflict. He ran on Jared Kushner and David Friedman are going to get it all taken care of and wrapped up for us, like negotiating with a flooring contractor in one of his buildings. And Trump's own actions are going to make that more difficult. And obviously, when he fails, he'll just blame the Palestinians, right? And his followers, by and large, will fall for it hook, line, and sinker. But the clear failure on this issue that Trump is rapidly heading towards is going to be his own doing. And of course, he's going to blame everyone else. Definitely extra erratic in the new year, don't you think, Pat? I mean, we're only on day 3 of 2018, and already 3 pseudo-significant scandals caused just by erratic tweets from the guy.
Yeah, I mean, this is an opportunity for him to start a new chapter, and the way that you do
turning
that,
the page,
especially after giving Israel exactly what they want in recognizing Jerusalem as the capital, is to give something to the Palestinians to bring them to the table, right?
Instead, he's doing the opposite. He's pushing them further away by tweeting that, on top of it, I'll cut aid from you.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone, then you want to raise aid or maybe even commit to something like reducing the settlements there.
Something. Say something. Do you believe this idea that's being floated, that the reason for these 3 outrageous tweets is to take attention away from what seems to be an about-to-explode Russia investigation? Or do you think that Trump's just not smart enough to even do something like that?
I mean, it's hard to predict where that's all going, right? I mean, I'd have to imagine that he has some sort of insight as to where it's all heading.
You think his lawyers are telling him what's going on? I don't know. We'll talk more about what's going on with the Russia situation tomorrow, but I really can't understand why. It's unforced error after unforced error. And in a sense, that's sort of been a theme of this administration. And I know some people are probably sick of hearing me say this, but a lot of the Russia scandal wouldn't exist if it weren't for unforced errors from Donald Trump. Tweets that really weren't necessary. The firing of James Comey, which, again, if he knows that he's guilty of doing really bad things, I guess you fire Comey because Comey inevitably was going to figure out what you did. But bringing more attention to the entire Russia thing. It is unforced errors that are the theme of this administration, and no shortage of them in 2018. Discuss this with us on our subreddit, davidpakman.com/REDBIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Colin Moriarty, who is the creator of Colin's Last Stand. You can find him on YouTube and elsewhere. A lot of people in the audience actually said, Colin, you should really talk to Colin. He's doing the rounds. He is a growing libertarian voice, and we'll talk to you about whether you agree with that sort of identification. So maybe we'll start there. I mean, how do you identify politically? Is libertarian fair? I know your Twitter handle is no taxation, which reeks of libertarianism to me, but maybe that's just one issue.
Yeah, the no taxation reference is a reference to the American Revolution. I'm obviously I believe in low taxation, but it's really more a reference to no taxation without representation. And I went to school at Northeastern University in your neck of the woods, I think, and majored in American history. So that was really more a reference to that. But I feel personally that I'm a moderate conservative, specifically because I used to call myself a libertarian before I really started to think that I actually am not a libertarian, specifically with the role of government and all of those kinds of things. I'm more libertarian on the social side. So I think it's more accurate to call myself like a moderate conservative.
So have your politics changed over time, or has this basically been your political paradigm for, I don't know, as long as you've paid attention to politics?
I honestly feel like I've gotten more liberal as I've gotten older, which is unusual. They always say that you kind of get more conservative as you get older. But
Yeah, but they are wrong. I mean, I don't know if you've looked into the data on that. It's deceptive because if you do a poll and segment it by age groups, at any given time, the older age groups will be more conservative than the younger age groups. But the reason isn't because people become more conservative as they age, it's because subsequent generations tend to be more progressive and remain so during their lives. So that's a common, you just have to look into the data on that one. But yes, you're right. That's a common phrase you hear thrown around.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought as a young, when I became politically cognizant in really middle school and high school, I was interested in reading a bunch of different things, and I had friends that were reading more like Marxist literature and stuff like that, which is interesting. And then when I got to college, I kind of was more, I voted, the first presidential election I voted in was 2004, and I voted for Bush, and I think I was a little bit more hardline conservative, never really socially, but more in terms of foreign policy and the role of government. And as I've gotten older, and maybe it's from 10 years living in San Francisco, and now I'm in Santa Monica, I was kind of softened a little bit on some of those things. But I honestly think that what was missing with conservatism was consistency and decency. And that was kind of a main line for me to kind of chase with my new project.
On what particular issue do you feel, or did you feel, that decency was missing from conservatism?
I think with social policies, I feel like, a woman's right to choose seems to me inherently a conservative principle, because it's a principle that says you should leave the person alone to make their own choices. The same thing with gay marriage. I was a vociferous and loud proponent of gay marriage when we voted in 2008 here in California, which obviously failed. So even back then, I felt like there's not a decency in terms of the way we look at others, the way we treat others, that a transgender person has the right to live a life unencumbered by government interference, even with the military, that a gay man has the right to marry another gay man, has the right to adopt a child. I feel like these are inherent principles that actually line up with conservatism, if conservatism to you means the government has no, or a limited role in your life, just like they have a limited role in telling you you can't have a gun, they have a limited role in other ways. I just feel like there's a massive inconsistency there, and I don't like the way, and I still don't like the way that republicanism and conservatism treats the gay groups and transgender groups and the like.
See, to me, it sounds more libertarian than Republican, and maybe that's the issue, the argument you're making, which is that in reality, you represent what you think conservatism or republicanism should be. But even the language you're using to me sounds very, very libertarian in a sense. I mean, I researched a little bit some of your foreign policy positions, and to give one, if I'm misstating it, obviously, please correct me. It seems as though you do tend to take more of a Rand Paul approach on foreign policy in terms of non-interventionism, except when the United States is really clearly and directly threatened, not meddling in the affairs of other countries in the sort of form of the policeman of the United States. Is that true? Because that, at least over the last 20 years, is more aligned with libertarianism than republicanism.
Well, I think that was one of the major shifts, and why I think that it's a totally valid argument or conversation to have about the definition of libertarianism and my own libertarianism. And I'm sure we'll get into other things that are decidedly not libertarian that I feel. But when I was in college, we were talking about Bush and my time at Northeastern. I was really for the war in Iraq, and I really was for the war in Afghanistan, and kind of seeing through our own lens the failure of those conflicts, particularly in Iraq, and how that kind of spread to a larger Middle East unrest in my mind, kind of showed me that an interventionist foreign policy, a neoconservative foreign policy, really makes no sense. And when you look back at Vietnam, and you look back at Korea, and you look at these wars of containment, for instance, they didn't really solve anything. I don't think the United States shouldn't get involved in anything that doesn't necessarily affect it. Otherwise, we never really had a fight in the European theater in World War II, and obviously that was the right thing to do, and we probably should have gotten involved earlier.
Yeah,
so
I mean, the counter to that would be we got involved after Pearl Harbor most acutely, and that was when we got involved because we were directly attacked. But not to sort of rehash World War II history in full.
Right. Well, that was the Pacific theater. We could have taken the Japanese much quicker. Remember that we inserted troops into Africa and over into Italy, 42, 43.
Yep.
Lend-Lease was going on with Europe. But we could have focused on the Pacific theater, ended that way sooner, probably without nuclear bombs, and ignored what was going on in Europe. And I don't think that that was the right choice. So I just wanted to be clear that there are sometimes heinous and terrible things that don't necessarily involve us that we should still do something about. And I think obviously Nazi Germany was one of those things. But when we look at Korea, we look at Vietnam, I just see a lineage of these failed wars and these failed conflicts. And while I feel we should have the most powerful military in the world, the greatest arsenal, the best trained soldiers, we have all of that already. It doesn't mean we have to use it.
Where are you in terms of this phrase that's sometimes thrown around? And I ask this again because of where we started on taxation. The idea that taxation is theft, and I won't qualify it any further than that and sort of turn it over to you. Is that a phrase, as I present it, taxation is theft, that resonates with you, or do you have disagreements with that?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with that statement. I think taxation to a certain degree is the cost of living in a society, and that's obviously a common phrase. My dad used to use this term. My dad is very political, and we've had a lot of political conversations in my life. He says that taxation gets to a point of being confiscatory. In other words, there's a reasonable level of taxation and a taxation where they basically are stealing from you or taking too much. And I think that's a line worth drawing. I think when you look at your, the funds that you make gross every year, let's say you make $100,000, and then the government right off the top takes 30% of that or so, and then the state government here in California can take up to 13.3% of that, depending on your income bracket. And then you're paying sales tax. Sales tax here in Santa Monica is 10%. So you're as you're getting hammered over and over again, taxation does get out of control. And so I believe that we have to pay some taxes. I believe that there are things we should be doing together. And I was actually against this recent tax reform because it adds to the deficit. But I feel as if there's a reasonable level of taxation and an unreasonable level of taxation. And I'm for making it more reasonable. I think it's far out of the bounds of reason right now.
I mean, part for me, and I'm curious to hear your thought, is one side of it is in the sort of abstract, what level of taxation is or isn't reasonable. And not everybody will agree what that is, but that's sort of one side of the equation. The other side is, what do you get for the taxes that you pay? Is that something you're also concerned about? Because certainly if you're concerned about military intervention, the spending on defense is pretty closely behind that. And then I'm in a position where I can talk about reasonable and unreasonable levels of taxation, but it has to be in the context of what are we getting for that, particularly when we look at what some other countries get for the tax rates that they have.
Yes, it is a huge concern of mine about what we get out of our tax money. I've long been a proponent of cutting military spending significantly, and I think that we could probably afford across the board spending cuts that can then maybe trickle down towards, and I know the term trickle down is loaded, but I mean trickle down towards the taxpayer if possible, an audit of our spending. I feel like there's a lack of concern with the American people, and certainly a lack of concern with our representatives in the House and in the Senate with how judiciously money is spent. And I think that we can cut waste everywhere. And even if we're cutting waste only $10 million here, $50 million there, $5 million there, that does start to add up. That's real money. And so I think we should look at what we're getting out of our tax spending. And I feel like we don't really get very much. I mean, that's my personal take. But I'm also in a privileged position economically. I grew up on Long Island in New York, so I mean, this is not a depressed area. So I know that it's easy for me to say those kinds of things. But I think that we could probably cut spending significantly. I think the government's too big. But
yeah,
again,
although but are you making the argument that that would be good economically? Because at this point, there's increasingly more and more economic thinking that suggests that actually even a focus on the debt is irrelevant. That would be like the modern monetary theory approach. But even stepping back from that, even just looking historically at the impact of supply side economics more broadly, it's really unclear that you can cut your way to any kind of economic improvements anyway.
Yeah, that might be true. And in fact, that is, again, a valid argument to be had. I'm not looking at it so much from an economic benefit or an economic deficit, although that matters. I'm really looking at it more in terms of principle. Yeah. And I don't like getting too caught up on principle, but the idea that if you're giving $1 to the government, shouldn't they spend that dollar in the best way possible? And if they're not, shouldn't you have really serious questions about it, regardless of the economic benefit or the economic deficit of, say, spending and its effect on the larger economy, which I think is a different conversation entirely. For me, I just feel like we should spend what is reasonable. We should get back what is reasonable, and anything apart from that, no matter how much we're spending or how little we're spending, should be discussed, because it is our money, and it's important that we spend it wisely. And as far as the debt and all those kinds of things, I know that there's this argument, a valid argument, again, I think, I'm not an economist, that it doesn't really matter, we can continue to spend our way into debt. But I just don't believe that, because if it's true, then why not just print $5 trillion a year?
Well, that's effectively what we do, and really we haven't had that significant inflation. I mean, I would encourage you to check out the work of people like Stephanie Kelton and Paulina Cherneva and some of the other folks in modern monetary theory, because that's exactly what they're saying, which is we do that, and depending on what we do it for, the idea that inflation gets completely out of control, it wouldn't happen, it hasn't happened. But anyway, that may be a conversation for another moment. Before we move off of taxes, do you agree with me that taxation is theft is sort of a losing libertarian argument, in the sense that I think that there are lots of people who sort of identify either as left or right who might be more drawn to some of the reasonable libertarian ideas that exist. But when libertarians take these absolutist views of taxation is theft, or even slavery, I've heard, that they're sort of doing their own movement a disservice. Do you agree, or do you disagree on that?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that there's a cartoonishness, frankly, to libertarianism, to big L libertarianism, that I feel is a turnoff, because it's not pragmatic. It's not rooted in the 21st century. It's not even rooted in the 20th century. And as much as I love Ayn Rand, and as much as I love the more philosophical or high-level thought of a libertarian utopia where the government isn't involved and everyone lives a sort of free life, it's not the way it is. And in a society of 325 million people, we have to have some sort of social contract with each other in terms of money, in terms of spending, in terms of infrastructure, et cetera, that makes sense for all of us. So it doesn't mean we have to have 25 cabinet level positions or whatever in the future. It doesn't mean that we can't trim and cut and make things more coherent and smaller. But in terms of taxation as theft, it's a funny thing to say, but it really doesn't make any sense, because, again, I'll say that taxation isn't theft until it reaches a certain point, at which point I would say it's more confiscation and less theft.
All right, let's pause there. We're speaking with Colin Moriarty, creator of Colin's Last Stand. You can find him on YouTube and elsewhere. We will pick up our conversation with him tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's talk about former White House chief propagandist Steve Bannon. There was a really interesting profile of Bannon, of Breitbart fame as well, in Vanity Fair. It's by Gabriel Sherman, who's really good at these profile pieces. And a recent question has been, how close are Trump and Bannon since Bannon left the White House? What's Bannon's political future? What does he think of the job that Donald Trump is doing? And in one section of this piece by Gabriel Sherman in Vanity Fair, Sherman writes that Bannon is reportedly considering running for president of the United States, which actually just sounds very un-Steve Bannon-like. But also, interestingly, he criticizes Trump, Bannon does, as having lost a step, and says he's like an 11-year-old child. Here's a quote from this piece, which reads, "In October, Bannon called an advisor and said he would consider running for president if Trump doesn't run for re-election in 2020, which Bannon has told people is a realistic possibility. In private conversations since leaving the White House, Bannon said Trump only has a 30% chance of serving out his term, whether he's impeached or removed by the cabinet invoking the 25th Amendment. That prospect seemed to become more likely in early December, when special counsel Robert Mueller secured a plea deal from former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Bannon has also remarked on the toll the office has taken on Trump, telling advisors his former boss has, quote, lost a step. He's like an 11-year-old child, end quote, Bannon joked to a friend in November. CNN political reporter Rebecca Berg identified a source that works with Bannon who says there's no truth whatsoever to the 2020 talk. That's the one part to me that is the least believable. I don't see for a second that Bannon would run for president.
And he'd have no chance, too. Back in April, he had an 11% approval rating, and that was well before Charlottesville, too. He hasn't done anything that would help his numbers.
I guess so. I just don't see him as the type of guy who would even want to do that. But in any case, that part, at least by CNN reporter Rebecca Berg, we are told is not true. The idea that Bannon himself only thinks Trump only has a 30% chance of serving out his term, that is very interesting. But also interesting is this idea that he sees Trump as an 11-year-old child. And I don't know the truth of each piece of this. I do know that Gabriel Sherman's work is very, very good, but it's curious to me how the post-firing phase of Bannon has been this kind of weird dynamic between Bannon and Trump. When he was first fired or resigned, whatever, forced to resign, he said he'd be working bigly or something on furthering the Trump agenda, all that stuff. But he's actually been hugely critical of Trump since leaving the White House. Breitbart and Trump seem to be feuding a little bit more since the firing. And the White House itself has also been criticizing Bannon as well. They supposedly separated on good terms, but the White House has also been more and more critical of Bannon. So what seems clear to me is that Chief of Staff John Kelly wanted Bannon along with Scaramucci out. He was right to want that. These guys were total political distractions. But what about the political support, right? Because aside from the public personas of these folks, presumably Bannon supported and worked with Trump because of Trump's agenda, right? He believed in the agenda. So you have to think that he still supports the agenda of Trump even after leaving the White House, but maybe not.
Well, maybe Bannon's just being independent here, right? He's out of the White House. He can speak his mind now. And when Donald Trump does something that he disagrees with, he can call him out for it.
What it suggests to me is that, like Trump, a lot of the people involved with Trump's campaign were not actually in it because of their political philosophy aligning with whatever they thought Donald Trump's political philosophy was. They were in it to advance their careers and grow their power and their influence for self-aggrandizement, right? Which are not really priorities you want for elected officials, even though it's pretty common that our elected officials have those as priorities.
And that's who Steve Bannon is, too. He
Absolutely.
leached off of Andrew Breitbart.
Yep.
That got him into a good position there.
No
and then
doubt.
He leached off of Donald Trump.
Am I wrong in saying that Bannon is bigger than ever as a result of having worked with Trump and having worked in the... There's no doubt
I
about
didn't
it,
hear
right?
of him before working with Trump.
Yeah, that's true. I had no idea who the guy was. So it's been very, very good for Steve Bannon, that's for sure. Let's continue our conversation about the turbulent reversals from former White House propagandist Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is now describing that infamous Trump Tower meeting with the Russian lawyer as treasonous and unpatriotic in a new book. He was speaking to Michael Wolff. Michael Wolff wrote a book called Fire and Fury Inside the Trump White House. It's reportedly based around 200 interviews with not only Donald Trump himself, but also very, very important staffers and inner circle members. The meeting in question, if you've forgotten about it, is this now infamous meeting in Trump Tower, attended by Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort and Donald Trump Jr. and several others, with this Russian lawyer, Natalia Veselnitskaya. And it's the meeting where this quid pro quo was intimated by Donald Trump Jr., that if the promised Russian dirt on Hillary from the Russians helps Trump win the presidential election, that then the Trump administration would be willing to look at easing Russian sanctions. Quid pro quo, very clearly intimated during this conversation and in the aftermath. Bannon crushes the entire thing in the new book. And again, as I mentioned, calling it treasonous and adding, quote, even if you thought that this was not treasonous or unpatriotic or bad S, and I happen to think it's all of that, you should have called the FBI immediately. This is major, okay? This is someone who, for whatever reason, he's decided he wants to say this publicly, at least said it to Michael Wolff, and now it's in a book. The fact that someone so high up in Trump's inner circle is straight up saying the FBI should have been called, I believe it's treasonous and I believe it's unpatriotic, that is a stunning, stunning thing for someone so close to the president to be admitting. And it makes a lot of other questions come up as well. Like, for example, is Bannon worried that he might be implicated? And is he trying to distance himself from what went on? I actually don't really think too strongly about that. For whatever reason, and I might be naive or just incompetent or ignorant here, but I actually think that Bannon and Kellyanne Conway, a lot of negative things I can say about them, I don't actually think they were part of the majority or any of the Russian stuff. I don't know why I think that. I just don't think they were.
I'd throw Mike Pence in that group, too.
Maybe Pence as well. I think Pence was maybe deliberately looking away from it. Steve Bannon also said to Michael Wolff that, quote, they're going to crack Don Jr. like an egg on national TV. Doesn't bode well for Donald Trump Jr. either. So one possibility is Bannon really wasn't involved, and now he's making it clear that all along he thought there was shady stuff going on. The other possibility, of course, is that, yeah, he was involved, and he's trying to distance himself publicly, but I don't think that's it. The third possibility, remember, he was chief propagandist after all, is just to say things that will create chaos, because we know that Trump generally benefits from chaos. And that would be the one that is most charitable in terms of the calculated nature of this, which is Bannon is saying, you know, I'm out of the White House, and there might be the perception that I'm feuding with Trump in the White House, but I'm really not. What can I do that might be good here? Let me go out and say something that will create chaos and impact the news cycle merely because chaos is good for the White House. I don't know.
I think there has to be something there, because it certainly flies in the face of the Trump defense mechanism of just saying, oh, we had never run a campaign before. We didn't know that you're supposed to contact the FBI and go about it in a better way, I guess.
Maybe so. And they've not gone to that much recently. They've blamed some of those missteps on others. Oh, Papadopoulos was the only guy who did something wrong, and everybody else is in the clear, and Michael Flynn did something kind of wrong, but it really wasn't that bad, and there's no collusion, whatever. How will this play among Trump supporters who have been loyal not only to Trump, but also to the sort of Bannon Breitbart propaganda complex as well? Are they going to pick a side here? Do they merely become completely cognitively dissonant and not feel the need for picking a side and just kind of rationalize away the fact that on the one hand, they support Trump, and on the other hand, they see Steve Bannon as this brilliant guy, but at the same time, Steve Bannon is saying that something that the campaign did is treasonous and unpatriotic? Maybe that's the way they go, which is just not even think about it.
And I think that's a very slim demographic, too. I don't know if even a majority of Trump supporters support Steve Bannon.
I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know what portion of committed Trumpists still see Bannon as just this sort of brilliant political operative that at least some believe the guy to be. I don't know the answer to that. But 2018 is getting off to a very, very fast start. Okay, we've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. A couple weeks ago, I mentioned that here in Boston, I'm part of a cryptocurrency group. And one of the things that sometimes happens is I participate in a poker game where the buy-in is paid for with cryptocurrency. And someone left me the following voicemail about that.
Hey, David, so you recently mentioned that you're in a poker group in Boston. I hope you know that gambling is illegal in the state of Massachusetts, and that I hope you're really not part of some kind of like illegal gambling ring or something. Right. That sounds really sketchy. And yeah, you know, you might have not have, you probably shouldn't have mentioned that, you know. Anyway, bye. This is pretty suspicious.
Yeah, very, very suspicious. How can we say gambling is illegal if we have casinos coming to Massachusetts? Or maybe it means that unlicensed, unsanctioned.
Versus unsanctioned.
Yeah, I don't know. In any case, I have nothing further to say about it.
I should have muted my headphones because now I feel like I'm implicated in all of this.
Just by having heard me say that. It's all, it's all fake money, right? I mean, cryptocurrency is not actual money, so there was no real gambling taking place or something like that. On the bonus show today, we will talk about a YouTuber under fire after posting a video showing an apparent suicide victim and the implications with regard to the YouTube universe of that. Uber for Blood in Rwanda, delivery robots that work kind of like Uber to deliver life-saving blood to people in need. And Amazon is buying, Amazon could not possibly be buying Target, right? Well, I don't know. We will talk about that on the bonus show as well. DavidPakman.com/membership, Patreon.com/DavidPakmanShow. Those are the two ways to get access to the bonus show. We will speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.